Welcome to Fair Bites. Fair Bites is a global nonprofit advancing AI ethics education through bite-sized content, resources, and community. I'm Amanda. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm part of the content team here at Fair Bites.
Hi, I'm Mana. I use she, her pronouns too, and I'm the director of the Fair Bites interview series.
In this series, we'll be highlighting experts in AI ethics and learning more about the work that they're doing. In today's episode, we'll be talking to Julia Dressel.
Julia Dressel is a current software engineer at Recidiviz, which is a technical nonprofit organization that provides tools and infrastructure to improve the criminal justice system. She previously has worked for Apple and graduated from Dartmouth with a BA in computer science and women's gender and sexuality studies. During her undergrad, she published a viral research paper exposing the limitations of Compass, commercial risk assessment software widely used in the criminal justice system. Julia is passionate about the ethics of algorithmic governance, intuitive and accessible design, and criminal justice reform.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, Julia.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, likewise. So we'll go ahead and get started. So first, we wanted to ask you if you can talk a bit about your background and how your interest in both computer science, technology, and also women's gender and sexuality studies started.
Yeah, for sure. So let's see, I'll take the first one first. My interest in computer science definitely was from, a classic high school girl in STEM. I loved physics and math. Physics was definitely my favorite subject in high school, and got to college and thought maybe I would be a mechanical engineer. And there was a prereq class to go into the engineering school, and you had to take some type of coding class. And so I took one of the introductory software engineering classes and loved it. Just was so excited to do all of the problem sets and stuff for that class. And it didn't feel like I was doing work. I was just so excited I was so excited by the problem solving in that class. And so very, very quickly was like, oh, I am not going to be a mechanical engineer. I would love to do computer science. So that happened pretty quickly in my undergrad experience, and mostly drawn by the problem solving there. I just loved having to draw out what I was trying to build and how I was trying to approach a given problem, how to solve it. And then the gender studies came. I was lucky enough to have a class with this incredible professor my freshman fall, that one of the first classes that I took there. And she was a gender studies professor. And it was actually a writing class, but because she was a gender studies professor teaching a freshman writing class, she brought in a bunch of theory, and I was just exposed to a lot of the theory that's within the gender studies department there. And I loved how much those classes gave me a way to think about, exposed me to new ways of thinking about my own self, my own identity, and power relations, and how I relate to other people, and how I relate to different power structures. And I was always so fascinated by the gender studies classes and how they gave me new ways to look at the world, and kind of accidentally became a double major in gender studies. I kind of got to my senior year and was like, oh, wow, I've taken enough gender studies classes that I could do a major in this. And I'm so happy that I did, because it was a really incredible major to be in. So that's how I ended up as a double CS gender studies major in college.
So fascinating. It's amazing how you just sort of, as you said, accidentally double majored. Yeah, that's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. Next, we wanted to ask about the paper that you wrote during your undergrad, which was titled The Accuracy, Fairness, and Limits of Predicting Recidivism. And I was wondering, could you talk about how you chose this topic and developed your paper, and perhaps start off by explaining what exactly is recidivism?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I will explain recidivism first before we dive in. So recidivism is actually a word that's used to mean a lot of different things. And in general, it basically means when somebody who has been in contact with the criminal justice system at one point in the past becomes in contact with the system again in the future. And so it can mean a rearrest recidivism, which means someone who's been arrested before ends up getting arrested again. There's reincarceration recidivism, when somebody who has been in prison before ends up in prison again. So the words actually can be used to mean a lot of different things, but basically it's somebody who's been in the criminal justice system has left and then comes back into the criminal justice system again. And that definition will become important when I explain this paper. So the actual research that I did while I was an undergrad was on recidivism prediction algorithms. And so there are technical tools that are used at various points in the criminal justice system that are algorithms that are used to identify somebody's risk. And so it's usually a risk of recidivism. And in most cases, it's like a risk of rearrest or a risk of reconviction. So a tool is taking usually a criminal defendant, so somebody who has been arrested and is either going to be let out on bail or held before their trial, and their information is sent through an algorithm, and that algorithm produces a risk score. So it's their information is usually their age, their gender, their criminal history, and stuff like that. And these tools produce a score that says, this is how likely this person is to be arrested in the next 2 years or to be reconvicted in the next 2 years or something like that. And when I think it was maybe my junior year in college, I was looking to do some thesis research that blended my two majors. So I couldn't technically do a thesis that was in both departments at the same time. They wouldn't let me. But I was like, okay, great. I'm going to do a computer science thesis, and I would really love for it to focus on a technology that is in some way reinforcing some systemic bias. So like, where is there something that's being used? There's where a technology is like reinforcing a norm or reinforcing a bias or deepening some discrepancy somewhere. And as I was trying to do research into finding an example of a technology that I could do some more thesis research on, an organization called ProPublica released a study on a recidivism prediction tool called Compass. And ProPublica found that the Compass tool was biased against Black defendants, and that it was more likely to basically over-risk a Black defendant. So say that a defendant that's Black was actually riskier than they actually were, and it was more likely to under-risk a white defendant. So say that a white defendant was low risk when that person actually had a greater chance of being rearrested at some point in the future. And so I kind of, once again, like had stumbled into something at a really good timing wise, where I was looking for an example of a technology that was reinforcing some systemic bias, and ProPublica published all of their data on what they had found on how Compass was reinforcing racial biases within the criminal justice system. I can go into the actual study if you want. What would you like to know about the actual paper?
Yeah, I think it'd be great if you talked a little bit about what ProPublica did and then what you did also.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so what ProPublica did was they looked at one specific county, Broward County in Florida, and they gathered a bunch of information on real people that Compass had assessed in a pretrial phase. So someone had been arrested and is before their actual trial, and Compass is used to determine what their risk of rearrest is within the next 2 years. And so ProPublica had around 7,000 real data on 7,000 real people, and they had what score Compass had given them. And then ProPublica scraped through these records that were available in Broward County and determined whether or not each of these people was actually rearrested within the next 2 years. And so what they could do was look at how Compass's predictions actually lined up with what happened. And that's how they were able to determine that the Compass scores were racially biased against those Black defendants, that there was a fairness problem in Compass's algorithm. And what we ended up doing was looking at the data on those same people. And we were at first trying to maybe think about algorithms and how we could possibly embed fairness into an algorithm. We were kind of just really interested, we being myself and my thesis advisor on this project, we're reading up about Compass, reading up about the kind of the accuracy of Compass and how what the accuracy rates were in this ProPublica study, and realized that the accuracy was pretty low. It was like 65% accurate. And that was pretty striking to us, especially because if you think about what these tools are being used for, they're in the courtroom, they're in other steps of the criminal justice system in order to replace or like help human decision making. Usually they're thought of as like a replacement for a human to make a decision. And so we were like, if something is going to come in to replace human decision making, it definitely should at least outperform what a human would do in that same scenario. And so we started looking for research to show what the like human accuracy is in trying to predict whether or not someone will be arrested for a new crime in the future. And we couldn't find anything. And so we were like, let's try to figure this out. Like, what is the baseline for human accuracy in trying to predict what someone will do in a criminal defendant context? And let's see whether or not Compass is actually better at this prediction. And so what we did was we had a bunch of human participants in our study, and they read a small paragraph about those real live people in Broward County, Florida. And the paragraph contained their demographic information and their criminal history and the crime that they had just been arrested for. And then we asked the people, do you think this person will commit a new crime in the next 2 years? And we were able to compare the accuracy of those predictions to Compass. And we found that Compass was not any more accurate than these random people that we paid $5 online to complete this exercise. Yeah.
Wow, that's like so incredible how you were able to like find an issue that was like really relevant and also to your interest and created like this whole study, and like the finding is just so remarkable, honestly.
Thank you. I feel similarly. I got very lucky that it was exactly the intersection of what I was trying to look at, and also that there was data available, and also a problem that nobody had, like a question that nobody had asked before that we could look into. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And there's going to be so many more issues when technology and more societal impacts are going to occur more in the future. So this is like the start of like this really big era. And so we wanted to ask you more about the current work that you do. So we know that you work for a nonprofit called Recidiviz, and that's very like in tune with your previous work with that thesis. And so we wanted to ask you about what you do at Recidiviz and what Recidiviz's mission is.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a software engineer at Recidiviz, and Recidiviz is a technical nonprofit organization. And our mission is to build the technical foundation for a smaller and fairer criminal justice system. And how we do that is we partner directly with state governments, and we build the data infrastructure ability for them to see in real time and also historically what is going on with their system. So like how their system has grown and changed over time and what's currently happening right now. And we also build the ability for them to see what the impact of certain policy changes could be on their system in the future. So if they set eliminate a mandatory minimum policy in their state, what the impact would be on their prison or probation and parole populations, how much money their state could save, et cetera. And basically it's a data infrastructure for understanding what's currently happening, what has happened in the past, and what might happen if certain changes get made in the future.
Thank you. Sounds like such cool work. Yeah, so I guess like building off of that, how do you personally feel about the use of such algorithms, these recidivism algorithms, like in real applications when like you've clearly shown that they're still biased?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that I will say about Recidiviz before moving on to that is that what we build thinks about data and technological applications within the system pretty differently than risk assessments do. So if we think about risk assessments, all algorithmic risk assessments in the criminal justice system are making predictions about a certain single individual based on historical trends of the criminal justice system. And so in order to build any algorithm, you need training data. And so if you're building an algorithm on rearrest within the criminal justice system, you need data about arrests within the system to train that model on. And so any risk prediction algorithm learns the patterns of what kinds of people have been arrested over and over and over again. And then it takes an individual person and says, how much does this person look like all of the other people that have been caught in this system repeatedly in the past? And then predicts, basically holds that past as reality and says, you've only told me about what has currently happened in this system. And so the only thing I know is the past. And I'm going to assume that those historical trends are going to hold true for the future. So I'm going to predict that this person that looks like the people that have been incarcerated the most in this community is also going to follow that pattern. And so it like assumes that the patterns of the past will remain true for the future in the predictions that it makes about individual people. And that's really different than how Recidiviz approaches data-driven decision-making within the criminal justice system, because what we focus on is how can we move entire systems? What were the patterns of this system in the past? What's happening right now? And then how can we make sure that the future does not look like that past? What are the changes that we can make? What are the policies that we can push for and enact so that these trends actually start getting better, and so that these racial discrepancies within the system start getting better? And so it's a very different philosophy of data within the system, because it's assuming that we don't want the future to look like the past, versus in a risk assessment model having to buy into that assumption that the future will look like the past so that you can like make any prediction. So I feel like that is important to clarify, especially since our name Recidiviz, people tend to think that we build recidivism prediction algorithms, but we actually don't. We're doing a lot of descriptive analytics, so like describing what is happening in the system or what has happened in the system, or making some like system level modeling predictions about what could happen in the future given certain changes. But we're not looking at individual people and saying, you should do this with this one person because we think that they're risky. Yeah. And I know that that did not answer your question, so I can go back and answer that now. You want to rephrase it though, because I forget exactly what you said.
Yeah, for sure. I guess like wondering like how you personally feel about the use of these algorithms, given that they are very biased.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of half answered your question. I have a lot of concern about the active use of risk assessment tools within the criminal justice system because of that assumption that they have to make. They have to be fed historical data on a criminal justice system that has historically and systemically over incarcerated people of color, particularly Black people in this country. Black adults, I have like a couple quick stats on that. Black adults are, I think, 6 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white adult in the US. And Hispanic adults are around 3 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white adult in the US. And we have just vast issues with the over incarceration of people of color in this country. And that has happened historically. And so if you take a model that's trained on those patterns, it's going to learn those patterns really well. And it's going to learn the associations between number of prior crimes and race that we see in all data sets, that pretty much any data set that you see that is being used to train an algorithmic risk prediction tool will show you that if you're Black in this country, you are more likely to have more prior crimes on your record. And the highest predictor of whether or not you will be arrested for a new crime in the future is how many times you've been convicted of a crime in the past. And so if you think about, okay, this tool learns the associations between past criminal behavior and future criminal behavior, and we have an inherent racial relationship between who is more likely to have been arrested for a crime in the past, then you're going to be inherently re-replicating those biases into the future as you make risk predictions about people based on those historical trends. So I think that I have a lot of concerns. One is that they tend to not be very accurate because it's very hard to predict what a person is actually going to do. But even when they are accurate, it's really hard for them to not perpetuate systemic biases that we see in any phase of the criminal justice system, whether it's policing, whether it's sentencing, whether it's imprisonment or parole decisions. Like, there are discrepancies that happen at every decision point. And so no matter where this tool is being used, I believe that they are an agent for making the systemic discrepancies worse and not better, and that it is an unfair use of technology from like an individual liberty perspective, that there's a decision that's being made about somebody's future, and it's based on how much they look like another person that has never been given a chance to escape the system in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. We are seeing like these algorithms perpetuating these biases, and it's still so complicated. And especially like I really like how you made that distinction about what recidivism's mission is on more of a systemic scale versus like an individual scale. And I think it's so great that we have so many different companies in like the criminal justice space that are like focusing on different areas. And I think recidivism is definitely like such an interesting take on the current like criminal justice space.
Thanks.
So for the next question, we're curious to also know about your personal opinion about where do you see like the future of AI and technology in the criminal justice space, and where would you like it to go in the future?
Those are two different things, I think, maybe. I have seen, tech has a way of finding itself into any space that it can possibly fit into. And so there's definitely a rise in the demand and the creation of technical tools for all over the criminal justice system. And there's a lot of technology you can see, like whether it's like phone and like video screen technology that are implemented within prisons, or whether it's electronic monitoring technology, or police like they've been trying to use a lot of like predictive policing technologies of trying to identify like where in a city is most likely to have a crime at a certain type of day. So there are a lot of ways that there are a lot of technologies that have been built for various parts of the criminal justice system recently. And it doesn't take, what do I want to say about that? There are a lot of them that are pretty concerning. There are a lot of them that raise a lot of privacy concerns. There are a lot of them that follow the same concern as algorithmic risk assessment, where we're taking data on this massive, massive criminal justice system, and one that is deeply, deeply systemically racist, and then taking that data as kind of the truth and the patterns that we will forever see, and then making decisions off of those. And so when I'm thinking about like the future of AI in criminal justice, it is hard for me to see AI solutions that will be able to get out of that trap of not having to rely on historical data. It's really hard to build AI without anything historical. And it's hard to build AI that says, ignore these patterns because we want them to be different. They're like, okay, I don't know what associations to build then if I'm not allowed to use the ones that are from the past. And so I'm skeptical about AI solutions in criminal justice, because I've just seen how so many will only make the problem worse in terms of disparities. I would like to be proven wrong. But I think you asked also like just in general technology in the criminal justice system. And I am very inspired by what Recidivism is doing with the use of technology in the criminal justice system, because we are not coming into this space saying like, there is the solution to mass incarceration is technology. No, it's not. It's a lot of policy changes. It is like drastic systemic changes to how we fund our societies, to how we have like modeled how people will be impacted, or like what happens when people break a law. There's a lot of changes that have to be made. What we do have is a humongous data problem. And so we have this insanely large system and very little ability to understand what has happened in the past, what's currently happening, and what might happen in the future. And to know, so it's like a good metaphor to use is like we have this huge ship and we need to be able to steer the ship. And so what Recidiviz is doing is providing the ability to know like, okay, where is the ship and what direction do we want to be going? And like, if I turn this way, is it going to make the ship go in the place that I want it to go? And so being able to actually have like a real-time data understanding of what is going on, like how many people were admitted to prison today because of a probation revocation, how many people today in the state of California are on parole and they should have been discharged already. Like those very, very simple things, there has been no ability to do in the past. And so saying like, we have this huge system, we need to be able to make changes that are going to make it better, and we need to be able to monitor what happens once we make a change. That is where I see technology coming into play in like a really positive way in the criminal justice system, is like shining light on where there are discrepancies and making sure that we're making changes to make those better and not worse.
Yeah, that's like really important, as you mentioned, just because like with all these emerging technologies, like there's not enough regulation and like not much known about it. So what Recidiviz is doing is really, really amazing. Thank you for sharing that insightful response. I guess we have one last question. And I guess we were just wondering like if you had any words of advice for students who are interested in this area of like AI plus tech and criminal justice.
I would say take some gender studies classes. No, I would say read a lot. Especially if you're interested in like particularly the intersection with criminal justice, it's super important to know the context. I would read The New Jim Crow. It's really important to know like the historical context of how we got to the place that we're in with the US criminal justice system. I would read Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis to think about like, how did we get here and where we are in terms of our kind of like US conceptualization of prisons, like how we think about prison. Another book, Unusually Cruel by Mark Howard, is a good example of how the criminal justice system is like more cruel in every way than other systems in comparable countries. I think he compares the US system to, oh, I'm gonna get this wrong. It's like maybe France, the UK, and Germany. I think he compares to like a couple other countries, and in like every single way, the way that we treat people is more cruel. And there's another book that I'm thinking of, Oh, Race After Technology by Ruha Benjamin, I would say is another good book. But in general, it's like have an understanding of what the criminal justice system is in the US, how it got to where it is, what the discrepancies are and why, and what it looks like. There's a lot, it's a complex space. So like understanding the difference between prisons and jails and probation and parole and how people move through the system and get caught in the system, I would say is important. And I think reading things that will make you skeptical of tech in the system particularly, like you should be always skeptical of criminal justice tech, because it is there's a small category of, I think, technical applications within the space that are like actively doing good. And it's really easy to build tech that is going to make things worse or is not making things better within that space. And I think reading just makes you like more aware of what can go bad, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. It really shows that like technology isn't neutral, especially in these spaces.
Yeah, and that was what my like research really opened my eyes on, that was that like there's a pretty large societal tendency to think about technology as a neutral or even a good, and especially with like a risk assessment, it's easy to think like, oh, it's an algorithmic tool, it was trained on data, of course it's not biased, or of course it's going to be accurate, or of course it's going to be more accurate than humans because it's technology, like humans are biased or humans are flawed or etc. And so being able to take a step back and say like, no, I'm not going to have any assumptions about what a tech can do, and I need it to prove itself before we use it, or I need to like make sure that it's not biased or not inaccurate, et cetera, before you actually, implement it in any situation.
Yeah, definitely. And again, thank you so much for teaching us about what recidivism is all about and more about like the historical complications about technology and criminal justice. And thank you so much for joining us again. We were wondering
You're welcome.
where can we find you or your work online if we wanted to follow up with what you're doing in the future.
Recidivism.org is a great place where you can see a lot of the work that we're doing. You can see like examples of policy memos that we've put together and distributed within state legislatures. And I would also check out, I don't have the links memorized, but you should definitely look at the public dashboards that we have built for North Dakota and Pennsylvania, where we have made public data of who is current, not who, but we have made these public dashboards for these two states that show the current, as of today, prison population and supervision population and probation populations in these states. And so you can see like, oh, this is the exact number of people that are currently in prison in Pennsylvania. And we have also built entire pages that highlight the racial discrepancies in those states. And there in North Dakota, the Native American population in North Dakota is highly over incarcerated. And in Pennsylvania, I think Black people in Pennsylvania are highly over incarcerated and over supervised compared to the like what proportion of the population they actually are in that state. So I would definitely go look at the public facing tools that Recidiviz has built. So if you look up like Recidiviz Pennsylvania dashboard, you'll find it, or North Dakota dashboard. And yeah, that's probably the best way to like follow what Recidiviz is up to.
This series is created by FairBytes. You can find more about FairBytes at fairbytes.org and follow @FairBytes on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook.